Welcome to The Explainer, where we break down the big stories. So today we're diving into a pretty major diplomatic reset. The first time a British Prime Minister has visited China in almost a decade. And believe me, this trip is packed with economic ambition, a ton of political pressure, and some serious global strategy. Okay, so here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at why this visit is such a landmark event. Then, we'll get into the economic gamble behind it all. We're also going to untangle the web of pressures the Prime Minister is under, see where this move fits on the global chessboard, and finally, ask the big question: what does this mean for the future? So, first things first, why is this trip such a big deal? Well, this isn't just another stamp in the Prime Minister's passport. This visit could be a real turning point, after years of some seriously frosty relations. It's breaking a long, and I mean very noticeable silence between London and Beijing. And just let that number sink in for a second. 8 years. In the world of international diplomacy, where things move at lightning speed, an 8-year gap between two major global players like the UK and China, well, that's basically an eternity. It's a sign of a deep, deep freeze. Which, of course, brings us to the million-dollar question. Why now, right? After all this time, what is pushing Prime Minister Keir Starmer to reconnect with Beijing? Well, the answer, as we're about to see, is a really complicated mix of economic reality and some major shifts on the world stage. So what's really behind this sudden thaw? Well, a huge piece of the puzzle is the UK's tricky economic spot, especially after Brexit. With the economy slowing down back home, the government is on the hunt for big opportunities abroad. And let's be honest, China's market is just way too massive to ignore. And you don't have to take my word for it. Here it is, straight from the Prime Minister himself. This quote really lays out the thinking here. It's pragmatic, almost reluctant, you could say. The argument is basically, look, engagement isn't really a choice for us. It's an economic must for a trading nation like Britain. And wow, this number really drives home that economic pressure. The UK is running a massive £42 billion trade deficit with China every single year. So to put it simply, Britain buys way, way more from China than it sells to China. This visit is, at its heart, a high-stakes play to try and shrink that gap by selling more British goods. And this table gives you a great snapshot of how things stand right now. You can see the UK is strong in things like cars and medical products, but then you look at what's coming in from China, it's all the telecom gear, the electronics, the clothes. A big goal of this trip is to try and rebalance that equation, even just a little bit. But, and this is a huge but, this whole economic mission is basically walking into a political minefield. The decision to cozy up to Beijing isn't just about money. It comes with some intense, and I mean intense, pressure from right there at home and from the UK's closest allies. This is the tightrope we're talking about. On one side, you've got this huge magnetic pull of economic opportunity. But on the other side, you have these incredibly serious concerns about human rights, not to mention major national security threats like cyber attacks and spying. How do you balance that? And the public is feeling this tension too. Check out this YouGov poll, it's pretty telling. Half of all people in Britain now see China as either unfriendly or straight up hostile. That makes for a really tough situation for any leader trying to build closer ties. And you can bet political opponents are turning up the volume on this. Here's the former Home Secretary, Dame Priti Patel, basically accusing the Prime Minister of being weak. Her argument is that things like security and human rights need to be front and center, not just trade deals. Okay, so let's zoom out for a minute, because this visit isn't happening in a vacuum. It's really a strategic move on a much larger global chessboard, one where, frankly, it feels like the old rules are being thrown out the window. And a huge factor playing in the background here is the possible return of Donald Trump to the White House. The chance of a more unpredictable America is making a lot of traditional allies, including the UK, think twice and start to, diversify their friendships and hedge their bets a bit. This has really pushed this idea of middle powers. The thinking goes like this. Countries like the UK and Canada, they're not superpowers, right? So they have to stick together and keep the lines of communication open with everyone, so they don't get squeezed between the two giants, the US and China. And you can actually see this trend playing out. Starmer isn't going it alone. He's really just the latest in a line of Western leaders. You had Macron from France, Mark Carney from Canada. They've all made the same trip to Beijing recently to try and get the conversation going again. So, where does all this leave us? What's the end game here? Is this high-stakes trip the start of a whole new chapter?
Or is it just a temporary ceasefire in a much longer story of these two countries drifting apart?
So let's just quickly recap. We've got a historic visit after a long, cold silence. It's being pushed almost entirely by the need for economic growth. But it's facing a huge storm of criticism at home over security and values. And it's all happening as the world's power dynamics are shifting. Really, the only thing that's certain is that nothing is certain.
And that brings us to our final question. Is this the start of a new, pragmatic, golden era in the relationship, or is it just a very fragile truce in what might be a much bigger, long-term rivalry? Honestly, only time will tell if this diplomatic tightrope act pays off.